Hello, everyone. Welcome to the War Room Podcast, the podcast where every single episode we run through a different subject from war and conflict. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle. Joined with me, as always, my co-host, James, also known as my dad. Dad, thanks for coming on today. Today, I think we've got a pretty interesting episode, which is we kind of want to talk a little bit, especially being Black History Month. We want to talk about African American contributions to the U.S. military. Now, I should say, this is a pretty large topic, so we're going to be covering some very specific sections. And we also, we were talking about this later. We don't really want to relegate the contributions of African Americans or really any group in the United States to 1 month. We think that's kind of silly. So this will not be the only time we're talking about African American contributions to the U.S. or Hispanic Americans or whatever it may be. Especially as there's some topics we want to go into later around like Tuskegee Airmen and a couple very fascinating stories of American history that we think are great to go through. So this isn't going to be the only time we delve into it, but with that in mind, I do still think it is a great opportunity to take it and look at some interesting aspects of contributions to the war now, or to the U.S. military. For this particular episode, we both kind of took a little bit of a different approach. You go ahead and I guess we've almost got like two topics that are kind of related. But why don't you go ahead and introduce your topic that you're going to talk about, and then I'll introduce mine, and then we'll hop into yours.
Okay. Basically, this time I'm looking at individual contributions for this episode, and so I decided to just go ahead and focus on Medal of Honor winners, and so I just wanted to look at their individual accomplishments. Instead of, say like a unit's accomplishments.
Gotcha.
For this one.
Gotcha. And for me, actually, kind of a little bit of the opposite thing. I am going to go into some individual accomplishments as well. But I'm actually going to talk about the 369th Infantry Regiment of the New York National Guard, more commonly known as the Harlem Hellfighters, a regiment that fought in World War I, one of the most decorated, actually, U.S. military regiments in World War I. So we're going to be talking about those things. You've got a couple points you want to hit first, and then we're going to get into the Harlem Hellfighters, and then we're going to end on some more of those examples of individual contributions that you have a list of. And then
yes.
That'll be the episode. So with that said, anything you want to say before we hop into the topic? I like a prefix or anything like that.
Well, I think that I would like people to understand that history is history, and it's there for us to evaluate. It's there for us to look at. It's there, more importantly, for us to learn from.
Yeah.
And so I'd hope that everyone would keep an open mind when looking at history, and just understand that when we start to delete history, remove history, or censor history, we run the risk of not learning from history.
Yeah, I would agree. It's important, especially with, and me and Karina were talking about this actually earlier, that history, the act of history is essentially just finding information and then applying it to the things we learn. So unfortunately, there isn't like a perfect system where we can just go back and just see a time shot of exactly what happened, the images that happened, the audio that was recorded, the people that talked. These things didn't exist. All we have is documentation that we run across. And as historians and as people, as we run across new information, it's super important to take that and apply that to the history we have. So I want to be clear that that's because lots of times we hear the word revisionist history and stuff. But technically, history is the act of revisionism. It is the act of taking new information that comes along and applying it to the situations where you didn't have that information beforehand. A lot of this stuff we'll talk, and this is, we can get into, well, obviously we'll get into this, but there's a lot of the people we'll talk about that their contributions literally weren't known to the world or to the public until far after they were actually done.
Yes,
So I think
exactly.
this is a great opportunity to at least take the history we do know. It's very possible that there's stuff that we'll know more about in the next 20 years, that will change the way that this history actually is presented. But I think it's super important to take the history we do know, and apply it to what we have, in actuality, to paint the full picture. So, with that being said, if there's not anything else, let's go ahead and hop into your topic.
Excellent. So, um, I wanted to start with the first.
Hmm.
There's always a first. There's always the first.
Yeah.
Right? First person on the moon, first person in outer space,
Hmm.
so on and so forth. So the first that I'm going to discuss is William H. Carney. So William H. Carney was in the Civil War,
Hmm.
and he volunteered to serve with the 54th Massachusetts. Now, a lot of people will recognize that name because the movie Glory, with Denzel Washington, and actually had a lot of big name stars in it. That movie is basically about the 54th Massachusetts.
Hmm.
Um, so this gentleman um, was in that unit, and he did work for, I believe, it's Colonel Robert Shaw, who was leading that unit.
Hmm.
Um, and on the attack of Fort Wagner,
Hmm.
um, I'm going to go ahead and just read the citation.
Yeah.
It's fairly short.
And real quick,
So,
can you explain to the people listening what a citation is when it comes to reference of Medal of Honor?
okay, so for the Medal of Honor, basically someone submits a packet with a whole bunch of information in it, and then when they approve the individual for the Medal of Honor,
Mm.
they take parts and pieces of that file and create a narrative, and that's called the citation.
Gotcha.
And then that's what gets read when they actually award the medal.
Okay.
Now, what's pretty cool about this one is that uh, William H. Carney actually was able to receive this award in person.
Mm.
However, he didn't receive it for, I believe it was 40 years.
Okay.
Something along those lines. So it took a very long time for this gentleman to actually receive the award, but he was able to be alive and actually receive it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So here's the citation. When the color sergeant was shot down, this soldier grasped the flag, led the way to the parapet, and planted the colors therein. When the troops fell back, he brought off the flag under a fierce fire in which he was twice severely. So that's the citation as it's written.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's a story that actually goes along with this.
Mm-hmm.
So with the 54th Massachusetts, he wasn't actually the flag bearer.
Mm-hmm.
He was a rifleman.
Mm.
And as they were assaulting Fort Wagner, the flag bearer was shot, mortally wounded.
Mm-hmm.
And the story goes, as the flag was falling to the ground, William dropped his rifle, ran forward, and grabbed the colors. Okay. He picked them up and led the charge up to Fort Wagner. When he got to the base of Fort Wagner, he planted the flag in the ground and turned around.
Mm-hmm.
There was very few left in the charge up to there. He managed to make it to the top of the wall. By the time he got to the top of the wall, however, there was no one left. There was no one left. So he immediately went back down and jumped into a hole. Now, the entire time that the 54th was assaulting Fort Wagner, they were being shelled from the fort and from the river. Fort Wagner is actually on a river, and as well as being fired upon from the parapets, as well as the top of the walls. Um, during the course of this, he was shot um, more than 2 times. It says twice,
Uh-huh.
but he had 2 wounds that were considered severe, but he was actually shot more than that.
Oh, they weren't severe wounds, or...
Apparently.
Fair
So
enough.
now, um, when he got back to the base of the wall,
Mm-hmm.
he was trying to figure out. They were in full retreat at that point, and he was trying to figure out how to get off of the battlefield. He ran into a soldier from the 100th,
Mm-hmm.
and he helped him with some of his wounds immediately. Offered to take the colors,
Mm-hmm.
at which point William Carney said no, and then they started to try to move off of the battlefield.
Mm.
Once off the battlefield, he's still holding the colors, and he's severely wounded. And he's walking down the little, road,
Mm-hmm.
and several of the Union soldiers noticed that he was severely wounded and offered to take the colors from him again, and he wouldn't let them take them,
Mm-hmm.
even though one of his wounds was actually being shot in the head.
Jeez.
This gentleman went through all of those things,
Mm-hmm.
and the colors were so important
Mm-hmm.
to these gentlemen back then that it didn't matter that you couldn't defend yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You picked them up and you carried them. The unfortunate thing is that it took a very long period of time for this gentleman to be recognized.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the other unfortunate things, and I know I've talked to you about this before, is that they had an opportunity to tell this story in that movie.
Yeah.
Because that movie had the attack on Fort Wagner in it.
Mm-hmm.
It had the color bearer waving the flag, but they never really got this actual real person story in that movie, and I think that's unfortunate. I think it would have been an amazing place to show this gentleman and his contributions. Now, a lot of people will say, well, what did he really do? He literally led a charge into enemy fire with nothing more than a flag.
Yeah.
That's it.
And I don't know if you'd mentioned this, but this is 1863, right? Like, this is, I want to say is the time frame.
Give me 1 second to.
I'm pretty sure, I can double check, but I'm pretty sure this is 1863 America. So
I'm 1864.
Okay, so 1864. So this is Civil War.
No.
Wait, no, I think that's when.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was 1863.
Okay,
You're
yeah.
right.
So this is 1863.
1864 is when he was finally discharged. That's
gotcha. Okay, no, you're good. So yeah, so this is 1863 Civil War America. Just in case I can't remember if we'd said that or not.
Yes.
So
this is he's the first, okay, to receive this honor.
Yeah.
And I think it's always good to talk about the first of things, but his bravery, it's very difficult to quantify what it is like to be in the middle of that type of warfare and have no defense, have no shield, and still stand in front. The colors are always in the front. They were never in the back. They were always out in the front. So and you're carrying it's like carrying a big sign. Hey, shoot me.
Yeah.
I can't shoot back.
For those that don't have reference, can you just explain like what the colors are and like how they relate to like the military at this time?
So there's a couple of different kind of colors. So you had unit colors. So those are the unit designation. And that was a visual way for you to look across the battlefield and tell who was on your left and who was on your right. And also kind of told you if they were enemy or friendly.
Yeah.
to be honest. But they also had the colors of the nation.
Mm.
And so at that time, there were two colors,
Yeah.
national colors
Mm.
on the battlefield. You had the Confederate
Mm-hmm.
Flag,
Yeah.
and then you had the United States flag.
Yeah. The colonial flag or whatever.
And so most of the time, you would see one flag
Mm-hmm.
of the nation,
Mm-hmm.
and then you would see unit flags dispersed throughout the battlefield as well.
Gotcha.
And so the colors that he picked up were actually the Union is a Union flag.
Yeah.
So the American flag at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was considered an honor to carry it, believe it or not. But it made you very susceptible to enemy fire because you couldn't lay down. The colors were not supposed to touch the ground. They were supposed to stay high and wave in the air. To this day, it's something that is very important to military people all across the. You will hardly ever see them they will hardly ever let it touch the ground.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone who's been on a military base during like the morning or at the end of the day when the flag comes down or lowers, like the ceremony involved and the reverence and the procedure of it all is super important. And it seems like it's a similar thing for any of these like identifiers, especially for the unit or just for the the army as a whole.
And I will tell you, part of the reason why we treat the flag with reverence isn't really about the flag itself for us. And I'm speaking for me. I'm going to speak just for me. It really has nothing to do with the flag itself. It has nothing to do with apple pie or moms or anything else.
Yeah.
The reason that the flag is important to me is simply because of all the people that carried it in the past. That the people that have not just carried it, but protected it with their lives. It was important enough for this man to get shot multiple times to bring it back.
Yeah.
That makes it important enough for me to stand. It makes it important enough for me to cover my heart. It makes it important enough for me to honor it, not because of what it is. It's just a flag. It'd be like me honoring a pair of pants, except it's really not that object itself. It's the people that have carried that object, that their memory is what's important to me more than that flag itself, if that makes sense.
No, I think so. By the way, careful tapping the table. It makes the thing shake. You're good.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah, I think I do think that particular story and like flag bearers as a whole is kind of a hard. I feel like it's kind of a hard concept for people to like wrap their heads around.
Definitely.
Because of it's just I don't know. It is a very there isn't like a civilian analogy I can think of to like something I can think of in civilian life that would make me understand it. I just have to get into the mindset of someone who does understand it, if that makes sense. Which is
it's a unique thing.
Yeah.
And they had other things in that at that time that were unique that are difficult to understand. Drummers.
Yeah.
A drummer, like, well, why would you bring a drummer to the battlefield?
It's coordination.
And they had a purpose. Not just coordination, but pace, tempo.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they would play and it would establish a tempo. People would move at that tempo and they would speed up, they would slow down. They had buglers, and those they had different songs, right? Or bugle calls, and that told you different information.
Yeah.
It allowed that information to travel to everybody that could hear it. We obviously don't do things like that any longer.
Yeah.
But at that time, all of those positions were very important, and those people were very vulnerable because while they are combatants, they're semi non-combatants. And the worst part is that a lot of the drummers were children.
Hmm.
That we were notorious for allowing children onto the battlefield in non-combat positions.
Yeah.
So it's just a different time.
Hmm.
It is something that's unique, and people probably have a hard time understanding. Well, why wouldn't you just leave the flag, and get it when you're done?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to distract from Carney or anything. I just for
No,
like
no, no, you're
context
good.
of the time.
Honestly, with him, there's not a lot of information,
Hmm.
um, just because of the time.
Hmm.
Um, and depending on what source you read, the
Hmm.
story changes.
Gotcha.
Um,
Yeah.
um, how many times he was injured
Hmm.
changes, and things like that. But I do think that uh, like I said, he's an important figure,
Yeah.
because he's the first. He's an important figure because he volunteered to do something,
Hmm.
um, and in an unpopular uh, time,
Yeah.
in a very turbulent time, for African Americans, and he still felt it was important enough
Hmm.
to volunteer and go out and do it, and that in and of itself, I believe that him and all
Hmm.
of the African Americans that went into the Civil War and supported that Civil War, I think all of them should be honored for that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I'm picking him because I could tell his story,
Yeah,
not everyone's.
obviously. Yeah. There was an interesting book I was reading some excerpts from, which is called, I think it was Torchbearers of Democracy. Um, but there's this prevalent theme, and we'll notice it throughout as we go through, that um, the the military is a very interesting opportunity for the African American community to essentially, uh, I mean, they shouldn't have to, but essentially prove to the United States that they are worthy of the rights that they're requesting. That's like a theme in a lot of the civil rights movements, and there are also movements that say like, why would you fight for a flag that, like, there is a duality to it? Why would you fight for a flag of a country that doesn't care about you?
Correct.
And then that is some of the arguments is like, the point is to make this country care about me. The point is to prove that there is a value to their life, and there's that value should be represented in the rights they should receive. So there's a very interesting duality, I think, with it, in most points of
Definitely,
history. That's
definitely.
not, it's not super easy, unfortunately. It's, you can kind of see it going both ways. I can see why someone would feel uh, like they don't owe the country anything, and I can see why people would think that they do, because it's the country they live in, and it's the country they want to be a citizen of, and they want to defend it as well.
Well, and I don't know that it has to be either or. It can
Mhm.
actually be both.
Yeah,
I mean, you could feel some of both of those things,
yeah,
um, and still serve. So
yeah. It's very complicated.
it's it is,
Um,
but I want to highlight
mhm.
their what their actions were,
Yeah, I think it's fair.
um,
Yeah.
because no matter what their personality was or what
Hmm.
their political viewpoints were, all of those things are very personal and difficult for
Yeah,
someone to come in after and decide what their motivations were.
yeah, as well as to
Here,
quantify and things like that.
yeah,
Yeah,
here his motivation was to get that flag,
yeah,
move forward, and when everything broke down, to
hmm,
get out with that flag.
yeah,
He could have left that flag. He could
hmm,
have left it, and nobody would have known. And 200 years later, nobody would have cared.
yeah,
Uh, However, but because he made the decision to grab that flag,
hmm,
move forward, and bring that flag back,
hmm,
here we are, X amount of years after the Civil War, and we're still talking
yeah.
about him,
True.
uh, and we're still recognizing that.
Yeah,
So no matter what his motivations were, we know what his motivations were for that instant in time,
hmm,
to some extent, and I just want to honor him for that.
yeah.
All right, let's go jump on to your topic, sir.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, that was the first African American Medal of Honor winner. Again, I did find the exact number just in case, because I think we weren't sure on the exact number, but it was 40 years after the fact he received his Medal of Honor. So I think that's what you had said, and that was William Carney. Yes. That was just kind of like an intro and as well as like an individual's contributions. I actually want to talk about what I think is a fascinating regiment, kind of contributions on a whole, which is the Harlem Hellfighters. So that's actually a nickname that was given to them by the Germans. So they were called the Hellfighters essentially because of the way they fought the Germans. They were called the Hellfighters by the Germans. They were called the Men of Bronze by the French. Obviously, they said it in French, but I don't speak French, so I'm just going to say Men of Bronze. And I believe by the Americans, they were called... I think it was the Black Snakes. Their emblem is a rattlesnake for their regiment. But it was they're actually a all African American regiment, served in the New York National Guard, Army National Guard. They actually also they served the most time in World War I than any American regiment, period. So 191 days of combat services in World War I, which is pretty insane because World War I, we've talked about it before. World War I, it's a very different kind of battle. Especially like the miserable, the fact that it compounded for a really long time. Like when you were stuck on the front, it wasn't just that you were there operating in like a defensive like wall type of area where you just you're doing security. If something happens, you take care of it, and then you're doing security. It's just constant assault on the senses, constant barrages of shell fire, and
exactly, it was nonstop. You couldn't get away from the war. No one got away from the war. The moment they were hunkered in their trenches, both sides were just shelling each other the entire time.
Exactly.
Nasty.
It's an interesting regiment. So just to give a little bit of backstory, they were actually originally called the 15th New York National Guard Regiment. It was only once they actually got into the war that they became the 369th Infantry. So that was their official regiment name. I'm just going to call them the Harlem Hellfighters, just because it's a badass name, to be honest. And it is an apt name as well. So the 70% of their regiment was from Harlem. For reference, at this time in like the 1910s, because this is 1910s, 1916 is when they were founded. In Manhattan, there was about 60,000 African Americans, and 50,000 of those lived in Harlem. So Harlem was essentially the location for African Americans in Manhattan.
And keep in mind that it's also the National Guard.
Yeah.
And so because it's the National Guard, it's going to be more localized. So everybody is going to be from one spot,
true.
Period. Because it's not, it is a state thing. So it's going to be that way.
Yeah, I believe the only other, they actually had to petition the New York governor to create this regiment, because it didn't exist prior to that. At this time, the belief was that there had to be segregated regiments, specifically because they felt that African Americans or people of color in general, couldn't be trained in the same way. There was a bunch of rationale that was bullshit of why they had it, but they believed at this time that it was required. I think the only other National Guard in the country that had another African American regiment was actually Illinois, which is what they modeled a lot of their stuff after. So, anywho, this is Harlem. This is the majority of the population in Harlem at this time is African Americans. And they actually did a very interesting thing, which is when they first started getting people recruited in, they actually started with recruiting musicians. And they actually recruited quite a few prominent jazz musicians at the time. And this is jazz musicians were making a very good living, actually doing jazz shows all across the nation. So
Yeah.
this was not a thing they had to do. Some of these people. What they would do is they essentially brought a bunch of these musicians together, and then they would do parades, they would do events, local events, they would do fundraising events, and they would kind of use that as their recruitment path to get people into the regiment. After much petitioning, they finally created this regiment. It was headed by Colonel William Hayward, who was a white lawyer at the time. He was a National Guard colonel. So he took command of the regiment, and he actually did something really interesting. I don't think they were the first, but they were one of the first to do this at the time, which was to use a mixture of African American and white officers. So they actually had both. Very specifically, he actually very meticulously went through all of the white officers that were brought into the regiment, and screened out as best he could anyone that would. He was very clear on his stance on treating the regiment any different. Was pretty standard for his policy. So he actually rooted out as much racism as he could. One, primarily to ensure that they could actually operate successfully, but also he did quite a lot to try and hold people accountable for any racism that was enacted against the group by the military themselves. So this wasn't just like him doing his job for it to be the most effective. Genuinely, it seems like this man did his best to ensure that this regiment was treated as good as possible at the time. For like reference, and this is like an interesting thing when you so obviously you've created your National Guard group, you have to get them trained. The training center for them was in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and this is in the middle of Jim Crow United States of America. So throughout their entire training regiment, they actually essentially he told them like, hey, if anyone messes with you during training from the military, the policy was nod your head, get through it, and then report them, and then we'll take care of it. That was the policy throughout the entire thing. But the interesting thing is they actually had quite a few clashes with the civilian population outside of the base, to the point where, and I thought this was interesting, there was an incident with one of the soldiers where they went into a hotel, I believe, to get a newspaper. And the owner of the hotel started yelling racial slurs at him and started kicking him and assaulting him. And he left. But in response to that, about 100 soldiers from the guard, or from the unit, left and came to that hotel. This is white and black soldiers. And were essentially gonna like beat up, like break the hotel and retaliate against the owner. It was only actually after one of the officers from the regiment stepped in and kind of mediated to lower it down, or to get it taken care of, where everyone kind of left their way. But there's a lot of tension at this time, is my point, between the civilian population and these people actually serving. So that's kind of like a contextual. It's very important to like how they actually came up during this process. So they get trained. They get their training. They're ready to go to the American Expeditionary Forces, which was essentially we had a group, and we said like, hey, this is the small group we're going to send into World War I to fight for America. What we actually did is essentially as like a bargaining chip. We actually offered the Harlem Hellfighters to the French to just integrate with them. So they actually made it to World War I before any other American troop actually got into the fight. They were already in the trenches when the American forces were doing their training process. So they were really early on. The idea is they were. I think the expression I heard is they were essentially wrapped. They were essentially put in a crib and then left on the French's doorstep. Is how it was described. So it was essentially like, hey, we're just going to give you these because we don't want to fold them into our forces right now, and it'll appease you, and we'll have a little bit of bargaining chip.
Yeah, I'm not really sure about all that, but expeditionary forces are still used today, and they do have a real life purpose.
Yeah.
And it's usually to gain a foothold, get a foot in the door, and establish. Now that I guarantee you, that's not what was happening then.
Yeah.
Um, but those type of forces are still utilized today,
Mhm.
uh, and they do have a very important role. Um,
Yeah, as I understand at the time, the idea was to set up like an autonomous set of forces in the area that could set up the preparations to get forces folded into other regiments for the other countries like British and France, and even
mhm.
Italy, I believe, as well as just get like logistical things set up. Um,
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, World War One is an odd time period.
mhm.
You didn't have the level of communication that you
Mhm.
do even as old as Vietnam and Korea.
Yeah.
World War One was very, very, very archaic.
Mhm.
You had runners run from here to there to give
Yeah.
information and back. Very dangerous job.
Mhm.
And so these expeditionary forces and things like that, um, they were kind of important in the aspect that it got you got a foothold in.
It said that the stream dropped, and now it says the stream is good. There we go. Okay, yeah, we're back. Thanks. Okay,
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
sorry about that. We had a little bit of a technical issue there. Anywho, yeah, the very interesting thing about the Harlem Hellfighters, their contributions to the war are super important, but they're also credited as bringing jazz to Europe, which is fascinating, I think. Once they actually first arrived in Europe, because again, this is a regiment built heavily actually out of musicians specifically from Harlem. Um, they were responsible for when they entered, the French wanted them to play in their bars and a lot of their shows. And for a lot of people, this was the first time they had ever heard jazz. Um, and it became so popular that there's events of them playing to like 50,000 people as soldiers. And this is in between, by the way, going to the front, coming back, playing a bunch of shows, going to the front, coming back, playing a shows. I think it's a fascinating, and France is, as I understand it, I might be wrong about this, but as I understand it, jazz started when it started there. It actually spread all throughout Europe. Jazz being one of the most important like musical contributions,
I was going to say
like
that's not
period.
surprising.
Yeah.
It's not surprising. Jazz is unique,
Mm-hmm.
and so in a we take it for granted
Yeah.
probably.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, but if you've never been exposed to that, it's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
rock and roll.
Yeah.
We don't care about rock and roll because, however, when people first heard rock and roll,
Mm-hmm.
it was something. It was visceral,
Yeah.
and jazz, believe it or not, is visceral. It
Yeah.
it it causes an emotion,
Mm-hmm.
no, positive or negative. It
Yeah.
causes an emotion, and
Yeah.
so it is important,
Mm-hmm.
and unique.
No,
That's
100%.
true.
But it is interesting that you kind of have to choose which contribution you're talking about. Are you talking about the most American man hours spent in World War One as their major contribution? Or are you talking about jazz? It's obviously both is the answer, but I
The
just
answer
thought that
is
was
both.
a
They're
very
both amazing contributions.
yeah, I thought this was a fascinating thing. But going back to the actual force themselves, they kind of entrenched themselves with French troops. They gained a lot of respect from the French for their fighting. There was quite a few incidences. Private Henry Johnson is probably one of the most well-known Harlem Hellfighters. He along with another private, essentially held off an attack from about 30 Germans, to where he fired his rounds until he was out of ammo. As soon as he was out of ammo, he began clubbing Germans with his weapon. As soon as that stopped working, he pulled out his knife and started fighting Germans. Actually, stopped them from taking another soldier with them. So these two people defended just a section of the front. essentially. And for that contribution, I believe he did not receive a commendation from the U.S. military until 70 years later, where he got his Purple Heart. And finally, a full, let me see here, what is it? I think it's a full 90 years later, in 2015, he received a Medal of Honor from Barack Obama. Sorry, 97 years. So 97 years after the fact, wow. Did he receive that. Now, to be clear, for this action, he immediately received the cross, the military cross from the French, which is their version of the Medal of Honor. So the French had no issue giving them decorations. In fact, the French, after the Harlem Hellfighters had served their time, the French gave all 170 members of the unit their military cross, which is a pretty big deal. And that's not even including all the individual contributions they did, or they gave, which is... Oh, sorry, it wasn't 170 people got it. Everyone, I don't remember how big the regiment was, but everyone in the regiment got one. They had 170 additional medals of valor that were given to them by the French.
On top of.
Yeah, for individual contributions around.
Wow.
So the French military had no issue giving them these contributions. They fought with the French multiple times. They fought at the Battle of Manet. They fought at the first and second Battle of Manet. They fought at the last battle the Germans actually fought. I believe it was the Meuse-Argonne offensive, I want to say, which was actually where they suffered the most casualties of any American regiment during the war. So it lost 144 people, 1,000 wounded. And that was their contributions, essentially. They fought with the French continuously through the war, came back, faced the same prejudices that they had left with, essentially, after that point. The U.S., they didn't get those contributions from the U.S. government until much later on. A lot of the Hellfighters actually were advocates for bills afterwards, federal bills to help veterans that would go on to help veterans later on. This is all, by the way, they're fighting, like literally in the months they're fighting, there is continuous lynchings and racial killings all around the U.S. There's the Houston riots. There's the St. Louis riots, where hundreds and hundreds of African Americans are literally murdered in the streets. So there is, all of these things are happening simultaneously as they're essentially standing as what can be argued as some of the most important contribution America made to World War I, as far as
Correct.
like time inputted, as well as like literal like man hours and valor. Oh, go ahead.
I would like to say that you have to understand that all of these individuals, they're standing as a wall.
Mm-hmm.
Now that wall isn't in your backyard; it's in another country, but it's still a wall.
Mm-hmm.
They're a barrier between someone else and your homes. And to this day, that hasn't changed, no matter what the color of the individual is.
Yeah.
But I will say for 100% fact that the fact that these individuals were making these type of contributions the entire time that their families are suffering atrocities.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to call it that because that's what it is.
Yeah.
And terrorism. It's still terrorism. That's exactly, the definition of terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, to scare people by doing horrible, disgusting things to other people.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it is profound that people that are persecuted and their families are persecuted are still willing to stand up and do these things.
Yeah.
Is profound. It can't be stated any more other than just absolutely profound.
Yeah, no, I would agree. That's,
and
I think that's a good point. And they're, like I said, they're many of them went off to do a whole lot of other contributions to American society, especially around jazz music and things like that, and the Harlem Renaissance and quite a few things in their own regions, in their own areas.
As citizens.
Yeah, as citizens. But yeah, I think the fact that, again, this was a lot of these people, this was a voluntary thing for them. This I'm not even talking about draftees. The huge portion of African Americans that were drafted, I think there was, I think it was 375,000 African Americans were drafted. 2 million signed up for the draft, but those were the numbers that actually were drafted into World War I. Like 200,000 of them just served or like 150,000 of them, I think, just served in like menial like dock worker jobs. They weren't incorporated into the military. They were literally used to just do hard labor, set up
a lot of
ports
them. A lot of them were servers. People that got supplies from point A to point B, stacked boxes.
And I should say, there's nothing wrong with doing those jobs, but it is very telling that the group that they chose by a huge margin to do these jobs was specifically African Americans.
True.
And I think it was like 1/5 of African Americans served in combat, while like 2/3 of white Americans served in combat during World War I of draftees.
True.
And that discrepancy, I think, speaks to something. But I do want to be clear that, like, I still think those jobs are obviously immensely important, and they need to get done. It's just a matter.
Somebody is going to be doing all of those jobs.
Exactly.
That is true. But it is also true that there was a disparity between one and another, and that is absolutely true. Yeah, and it should be stated as such, because that is history. It's what happened. Yeah, and I can't change what happened. You can't change what happened. Yeah. The only thing that we can do is change the future and how we perceive people and how we treat people in the future. That's all we can do. I can't be held accountable for what somebody else did. I can only be accountable for what I do. Yeah, no, I agree. Shouldn't be.
So that's the Harlem Hellfighters. They served a little bit in World War II as well. They actually got a big, quite a few Puerto Rican volunteers as well during that time frame, but they were disbanded after that. But I would highly recommend looking it up, if not just because there's some fascinating stories and the fact that they've contributed in so many different ways to both American, and I would say more importantly, the fact that they took what I think are some of the best American values and some of the coolest American cultures and things,
and spread that.
Important ones, and spread that, I think is awesome. I think the world would be a very different place without just one regiment, which I think is a cool thing. But that's all I have for the Harlem Hellfighters.
Yeah, please, anybody that's listening, watching, go and look at these things, because we're only highlighting them. We're not getting really too in depth in it. Yeah, and their contributions were vast and pretty incredible. Yeah, pretty incredible. Yeah. All right, let's hit a couple more Medal of Honor. Yeah, folks. So before I start the next group, I want to say that this is a reoccurring theme. The next individuals I'm going to talk about were from World War II. It was more than 50 years for them to receive any type of recognition for their acts of heroism. And I'm going to be honest, that's embarrassing, to say the least. Yeah. In the early 90s, we had 0 African-American Medal of Honor winners for World War II. All the way into the 90s. And that is, it's embarrassing. Yeah. As a past soldier, I find that to be just truly embarrassing. So at one point they reviewed 10 individuals, and of those 10 individuals, 7 of them were selected for the Medal of Honor. And I believe it was Bill Clinton that issued all of those Medal of Honors. Now, unfortunately, only 1 of those 7 was able to receive the award. And why is that important to me? The reason that is important to me is because it is great for the families to receive an award, a medal, a citation, and not sometimes the individual is not able to receive it because they receive it posthumously, meaning that they passed away. There was no way to ever receive it for them. It's just unfortunate when somebody does something truly brave and truly heroic and they aren't recognized in their life, in their normal lifespan.
Especially when it was an option, because you're right. Like I think the majority of Medal of Honors are presented posthumously, and the fact that they could have received it.
Yes, and that's what's unfortunate.
Yeah,
I believe the people that die for their heroic action, there's nothing that can be done about that. They're that no matter what.
Yeah.
But the fact that it took 50 years is truly embarrassing.
Yeah.
I hope, it is my hope that we grow beyond that at some point and we look at a person quality based off of what they are and what they do based solely for that. Keep in mind that this isn't about anything other than what an individual does.
Yeah.
Whether they be Mexican, whether they be Honduran, whether they be American, these are for actions that they do. And so the rest shouldn't matter.
Oh, sorry, you cut out for a second there. Careful with the table, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about George Watson. So he's one of the individuals, one of the 7 from World War II. So here is the citation. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Private George Watson distinguished himself by extraordinary heroism on 8 March 1943. While serving in the Pacific Command with the 2nd Battalion, 29th Quartermaster Regiment, near Parlock Harbor, New Guinea, Private Watson was on board a troop ship, the Dutch steamer, a United States Army transport, Jacob, when it was attacked and hit by enemy bombers. Before it sank, the ship was abandoned. Private Watson, instead of seeking to save himself, remained in deep waters long enough to assist several soldiers who could not swim to reach the safety of a life raft. This heroic action was subsequently cost him his life, resulted in saving the lives of several of his comrades. Weakened by continuous physical exertion and overcome by muscular fatigue, Private Watson drowned when the suction of the ship dragged him beneath the surface of the swirling waters. His demonstrated bravery and unselfish acts set in motion a train of compelling events that finally led to American victory in the Pacific. Private Watson's extraordinary valorous actions, his daring and inspiring leadership, and his self-sacrificing devotion to his fellow man exemplify the finest traditions of military service. So this individual received the Medal of Honor not for killing a bunch of enemy, not for storming a hill. He received the Medal of Honor for literally swimming from a sinking ship, dragging other people that cannot swim to a lifeboat, and then swimming all the way back to the ship, grabbing somebody else, dragging them through the water all the way to a life raft. He did this so many times that he literally drowned because of exhaustion. That says something about this man's character. It was important enough to him to literally swim back and forth just to save someone else's life. And in the end, it cost him his. And there was a lot of people that have done a lot of amazing things.
Yeah.
And we're just picking and highlighting a few. But I will tell you that in all of this, all of the chaos of a sinking ship, people drowning, to have the mental fortitude and the drive to continually place yourself in harm's way and to continue to drag people through the water,
Yeah.
and to continue to do that. We're not talking 2 or 3 trips.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. At some accounts, he made that trip 15 to 20 times.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That requires a will that a lot of people just don't have.
Yeah.
And I believe that he is also the only one to receive the Medal of Honor from the Pacific Theater. All of the rest were from the European theater.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt that it was important enough to cite his bravery, just because this wasn't him dodging mines and hand grenades. This was him literally just caring enough about his fellow man to drag them through the water to safety.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you highlighted an interesting point, which is it's an easy thing to think of yourself in a situation and say, "Well, I would do this, or I would also do that." You know, I also care about people. But to be in that scenario and to actually do it, especially to the point where, because I'm sure had he brought someone to the life raft with him, put him on board, hopped on, no one would look at him and say, "Wow, you should have done more." No one would have given him grief. No one would have said anything. But you're right. That decision to do that is something I would hope we all strive to do, but also I understand only a few of us actually have the will and the fortitude to do that. That's an insane decision to make.
And the other thing that I would like to highlight is that there were a lot of people on those rafts that weren't at Muscle Fire. Now, some of those were injured and couldn't make that trip twice. Some of them couldn't swim enough to get to the lifeboat themselves.
Yeah.
But this gentleman took it upon himself to make continuous trips back and forth.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself is heroic and humanitarian in a way that is a little bit different than some of the others that I've talked about, and the others that I will continue to cover. Is that this is unique because it's very human in nature, and the fact that he went above and beyond, I believe that this is absolutely something that needed to be recognized, and I'm glad that I got to at least share this story with people.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so I'm gonna hit one more here.
Gotcha.
And
I think we'll be good on time after that. So
okay, great. John R. Fox, he's one of the 7 from World War II, excuse me. I'm gonna go ahead and read the citation, and then we can talk about it. Okay. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, First Lieutenant John R. Fox distinguished himself by extraordinary heroism at the risk of his own life on 26 December 1944. In the Serchio River Valley sector, in the vicinity of, I apologize as I butcher this name, Soma Colonia, Italy, Lieutenant Fox was a member of the Cannon Company 366 Infantry, 92nd Infantry Division, acting as a forward observer. Now, a forward observer is usually somebody from the artillery, and they sit out and basically are the eyes for the artillery. They call for fire from a point while they're actually visually looking at the enemy.
Gotcha.
Okay. While attached to the 598th Field Artillery Battalion, Christmas Day in the Serchio Valley was spent in positions which had been occupied for some weeks. During Christmas night, there was a gradual influx of enemy soldiers in civilian clothes, and by early morning, the town was largely in enemy hands. An organized attack of uniformed German formations was launched around 0400 hours on the 26th of 1944. Reports were received that this area was being heavily shelled by everything the Germans had, and although most of the U.S. infantry forces withdrew from the town, Lieutenant Fox and members of his observer party remained behind on the second floor of a house. Directing defensive fires, Lieutenant Fox reported at 0800 hours that the Germans were in the streets and attacking in strength. He called for artillery fire increasingly close to his own position. He told his battalion commander, "That was just where I wanted it. Bring it in 60 yards." His commander protested that there was a heavy barrage in the area and that the bombardment was too close. Lieutenant Fox gave his adjustment, requesting that the barrage be fired. The distance was cut in half. The Germans continued to press forward in large numbers, surrounding the position. Lieutenant Fox again called for artillery fire, with the commander protesting again. "Fox, that will be on you." The last communication from Lieutenant Fox was, "Fire it. There is more of them there than are us. Give them hell." The bodies of Lieutenant Fox and his party were found in the vicinity of his position when his position was taken. This action by Lieutenant Fox, at the cost of his own life, inflicted heavy casualties, causing the deaths of approximately 100 German soldiers, thereby delaying the advance of the enemy until infantry and artillery units could reorganize and meet the attack. Lieutenant Fox's extraordinary, valorous actions exemplified the highest traditions of military service. I want to note that when they were pulling out of this city, they volunteered to stay. And they were calling for fire throughout. It talks about, in this citation, about Germans infiltrating the city in civilian clothes. And then it talks about an attack at about 4 a.m. So what they had was German soldiers in civilian clothes infiltrating the city and launching attack at the same time that Germans in uniforms are launching attack from outside the city and in a coordinated assault. The fact that this individual kept his head during all of this, was calling for fire throughout the entire time on different targets, and had the grit and the will to say, "Hey, bring it right here. This is where they're at."
Yeah.
To get the most effect. He made a decision that the most effect he could have was literally to bomb himself. Not just himself, but himself and his comrades.
Yeah.
It takes some stones to give up your life.
Yeah.
It does. It takes even more stones to give up the lives of your comrades.
Yeah.
That is a profound sacrifice that this gentleman was willing to make. And it took us way too long to recognize this.
Yeah.
Just reading the citation. This is just the citation. This isn't the full packet that was submitted on what this gentleman had accomplished. This is just me reading the citation. This is the short version, the footnote.
Yeah.
Just reading it tells anyone that this individual acted in a way that was above and beyond.
Yeah.
And the fact that we took so long to recognize these things it's embarrassing to me.
Yeah.
But I am happy that at some point someone said, "Hey, we need to recognize these things."
Yeah.
We need to recognize these things. So I want to let everybody know that the individuals that I highlighted are, you can find them on the Medal of Honor website, United States Medal of Honor website. And if you're interested in African Americans that have received our nation's highest honor, okay, for military service, you can go on that website and you can look at all of the recipients, and if you want to view just African American ones, you can pull them up. It does sort them. There are a lot of people that have deserved and earned that award, and it can be humbling to read what some people have done for everyone in this country. Yeah. I consider every one of those individuals as doing something profound for this country.
Yeah.
Whether the color of their skin doesn't matter to me, but these individuals did something, and something generally profound.
Yeah.
And I would like to say that to any of the family members out there, you should be proud of your ancestors. You should be proud of the people that came before you, and proud of what they accomplished.
Yeah. If anyone's interested, highly recommend www.cmohs.org. You can that's what we were talking about. You can find a list of the Congressional Medal of Honor winners. That's the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, is what that stands for.
Now, I wanted to bring up one other thing, since we were talking about the Medal of Honor, is there's actually another part of that organization that does recognize civilians. So if you know of someone that has done something profound in their community, if they've done something that you believe is noteworthy at the national level, you can submit them for the civilian side of the Medal of Honor. And I did not know about that.
I didn't know that either.
I had no idea.
This is it looks like it's called Citizen Honors. There's a couple different awards. It looks like it's called, on the same website you can submit, the cmohs.org. It's called a Citizen Honors. There's a couple different categories you can do.
There is. And so I would say that if you know somebody that has done something profound, put them in and see what happens. You never know. I mean, recognize people for their accomplishments and for their achievements. If you can, if you have that ability, if you know somebody that is standing up for what is right or doing what is good and positive in their communities, put them in for these things.
Yeah.
The answer is always no if you don't submit.
Yeah. Also, but
if you do submit, sometimes the answer is still no, but sometimes the answer might be yes.
Yeah. Also, I think like a lot of what we talked about is around not like these Medal of Honors and these Purple Hearts and just these commendations given so long after the fact. We can literally stop that right here. If you see someone who you think deserves something, put it in.
If somebody, this is a pandemic. If somebody's been out there doing something for people and taking care of the communities, put them in. Yeah. See what happens. You never know. I'm going to tell you, we as a culture and as a nation have been waiting way too long to recognize people for performances that are above and beyond.
Yeah.
And the longer we continue to do it, the longer it'll take for people to be recognized. And it only makes the divides greater.
Yeah.
It only makes the divides greater. If somebody does something great, recognize that something. If somebody does something profound, recognize it for what it is. Period.
Yeah, I agree. That's fair. I did not know that there was a Citizens Honors version of that. That's very cool. It is very cool. Okay, well, I guess any other thoughts on that?
No, I hope that at some point we can just be better humans.
Yeah, I
Period.
agree.
All the way around.
Yeah.
And I think that some of the individuals that we've talked about today um, uh, proved to be better humans
Yeah.
in some aspects.
Yeah.
Uh, and and um, and it's good to look at those and recognize those. And I
Yeah.
will say that we hit it earlier. I don't believe that you should only recognize people
Mm-hmm.
in a certain month. I do believe that is an excellent time to highlight people.
Yeah.
Um, but I think you and I
Mm-hmm.
both uh, will agree that we're recognizing people all the time for their accomplishments and what they do.
Yeah.
And we're looking at history
Yeah.
in and of itself, and it's less about the individual.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have an agenda. I guess
Yeah.
is our agenda is what is interesting, what is historical.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in it is important. Part of the reason, and we've talked about like the complexity of especially how these people like must have felt with the way their country was and what they were doing and things like that. But I think a huge step towards alleviating that is part of that comes from just mistreatment of a lot of marginalized groups. And as we fold them in, it becomes a lot easier to not talk about their achievements as just their group, but to revel in them as Americans. I'm not just proud of the people we've talked about because they're African Americans. I'm proud of them because they're Americans, and I'm an American citizen.
Exactly.
And
they did profound things, yeah.
And their contributions speak to the world I want to live in and the nation I want to live in. So I think that goes a long way into helping a lot of the still divide we have within our nation. I would agree. But obviously it's a very complex issue. So, we're like, there's no way that there's not like there's a bunch more nuance in all the stuff we're talking about. Again, we were just highlighting stories and individual things. We do recommend that you go and read about these things. We do recommend that you go and learn up about these things. It's super important to have your own information about this.
Yeah.
But well, I guess with that, anything before we end?
No, I think that I like this episode. I think it was great. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that everybody out there enjoys it. So the pandemic and the COVID is still out there, and people are still getting sick. Please protect yourselves, protect your families, do everything that you can to just survive this thing.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And help reduce the spread of it if you can.
Yes, please do. Well said. Well, with that, please do make sure to follow the podcast wherever you are listening to us. If you ever want to catch us live, do remember that we are on twitch.tv /War Room Podcast. You can check us out there live. We usually do, we're going to try to get into a cadence. So far, we're looking to do Sundays at 5:30 Central Time is what we're kind of looking at right now. But we might change that around depending on what we have available in our time zones and stuff. So all you have to do is go to twitch.tv /War Room Podcast. Give us a follow there, and you'll actually receive a notification when we're live. So that way you don't have to do any work. Make it super easy. You can always catch the video version of this on YouTube at War Room Podcast on YouTube. You can go ahead and look us up if you want to watch this live with the two of us talking to each other and chat and all that stuff going on the side. You can catch that there. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow, all that jazz. And please do share with your friends and families and anyone you think might enjoy this, that we're doing this. We've been getting actually, I think, some pretty good engagement as I've been looking at the podcast. So I would we would really appreciate it if you would share this with people that you think might be interested. As always, if there's anything we've missed, if there's anything we messed up, if you have any comments, concerns, anything like that, you can always shoot us an email at thewarchat@gmail.com. We'll happy to talk with your suggestions, happy to print any retractions or talk about any retractions if we messed anything up in the next episode. I think that's the full spiel. I think I got it down. Anything I missed?
No, I think you're good.
Cool. Well, with that, we do appreciate everyone listening, and we will see you later. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody.